Operation Paperclip, 1945. But before we begin this story, put a like, press the notification bell, and subscribe to our channel to learn more fascinating secrets about the mysteries of the Second World War. Now let's continue. The year 1945 was supposed to mark the end of destruction. Germany had surrendered. The Third Reich had collapsed. The world exhaled in relief as headlines declared victory. Yet behind the celebrations, something far more strategic was unfolding. American intelligence officers were not focused on parades or speeches. They were studying reports, scanning lists of names, and reviewing captured documents that revealed an uncomfortable truth. Nazi Germany had developed technologies that could change the future of warfare forever. Deep beneath bombed cities and hidden inside underground research facilities were blueprints for advanced rockets, jet aircraft, and experimental weapons that had pushed engineering beyond anything the Allies had expected. The V-2 rocket alone represented a terrifying breakthrough. It was the first long-range guided ballistic missile, capable of reaching the edge of space before descending at supersonic speed onto its target. No defense system of the time could stop it. That single invention proved that the next global conflict would not be fought the same way as the last. And American officials understood something else. The Soviet Union was searching for these same scientists. The war may have ended, but the rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union was intensifying rapidly. The Cold War was beginning to take shape, and technological superiority would define the balance of power. So the United States made a decision rooted in strategy rather than sentiment. They would recruit Germany's top scientists before the Soviets could. This decision became Operation Paperclip. The name sounded simple, even harmless, but it concealed one of the most controversial intelligence operations in modern history. American teams moved quickly through occupied Germany, locating physicists, chemists, aeronautical engineers, and missile designers. They interrogated them, evaluated their expertise, and offered them relocation to the United States. Among the most valuable was Wernher von Braun, the brilliant engineer who led the V-2 rocket program. He had always claimed that his dream was space travel, that rockets were meant to explore the stars. But during the war, those same rockets had been used to strike cities like London and Antwerp. They were manufactured in underground facilities using forced labor from concentration camp prisoners, many of whom died under brutal conditions. When American forces approached, von Braun chose to surrender to them rather than risk Soviet capture. The Americans recognized his immense value. However, his past posed a moral dilemma. Officially, the United States had fought to defeat Nazism. Publicly embracing a former member of the Nazi Party would contradict that narrative. The solution was administrative and discreet. Background records were reviewed carefully. Certain affiliations were softened in official summaries. The emphasis shifted to scientific achievement rather than political involvement. New documentation was attached to existing files. And so, one by one, more than 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians were transported to the United States, often with their families. They were settled in controlled environments, including military installations in Texas and later research centers in Alabama. There, under American supervision, they continued their work. Their expertise accelerated the development of missile technology. The knowledge gained from the V-2 program evolved into more advanced ballistic systems capable of carrying nuclear warheads across continents. As tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union escalated in the late 1940s and early 1950s, the significance of Operation Paperclip became increasingly clear. When the Soviet Union tested its first atomic bomb and later launched Sputnik in 1957, the United States realized it was locked in a technological competition that extended beyond Earth itself. The space race had begun. The rocket technology developed by former German engineers formed a crucial foundation for America's response. By 1969, when Apollo 11 launched toward the moon, Wernher von Braun stood among the key figures behind the Saturn V rocket. Humanity watched as Neil Armstrong took humanity's first step onto the lunar surface. It was celebrated as a victory of science, freedom, and progress. Yet few people fully understood that the path to that achievement began in the laboratories of a defeated regime.
RCH originally funded for strategic purposes, computer systems development.
Operation Paperclip remains one of the most debated operations of the 20th century because it forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. Can strategic necessity justify moral compromise? Should justice have outweighed the fear of Soviet dominance? Did the urgency of the Cold War redefine what was considered acceptable? History rarely offers simple answers. What is undeniable is that Operation Paperclip reshaped the modern world. It accelerated the arms race, influenced the development of intercontinental missiles, and played a direct role in humanity's journey into space. In 1945, as the world believed it had stepped into peace, a silent competition had already begun. A competition fought not with bullets, but with brilliance. And that competition intensified almost immediately. While newspapers celebrated reconstruction and diplomats spoke of cooperation, intelligence agencies were already calculating advantages. The United States and the Soviet Union understood that the next global conflict would not necessarily begin with marching armies, but with technological breakthroughs. The side that mastered rocketry, nuclear delivery systems, and high-altitude flight would possess leverage that could not easily be challenged. In the ruins of Germany, laboratories became treasure vaults. Scientific documents were gathered by the truckload. Entire facilities were dismantled and shipped abroad. Engineers who once designed weapons for the Third Reich suddenly found themselves courted by former enemies. Some cooperated eagerly, motivated by survival or ambition. Others hesitated, aware that their past could follow them across oceans. Yet the reality was stark. Neutrality was no longer an option. To refuse recruitment risked Soviet capture or prosecution. To accept meant entering a new system built on secrecy. In the United States, relocated scientists were placed in controlled environments where their expertise could be carefully directed. Military officials monitored their progress while integrating their research into American defense projects. The early focus was missile development. The knowledge extracted from the V-2 program allowed American engineers to bypass years of experimentation. Test launches in remote deserts became stepping stones toward more sophisticated ballistic systems. Each successful launch strengthened confidence that the United States would not fall behind in the emerging Cold War. Meanwhile, ethical debates simmered quietly beneath the surface. Some American officials questioned whether justice had been sacrificed. Survivors of Nazi atrocities struggled to understand how individuals connected to a brutal regime could rebuild careers in comfortable research facilities. Yet Cold War anxieties consistently overpowered moral hesitation. Strategic dominance became the priority. As the late 1940s transitioned into the early 1950s, global tensions escalated. The Berlin blockade demonstrated how quickly the fragile alliance between former wartime partners had dissolved. The Korean War confirmed that ideological conflict could erupt into open violence. In this atmosphere, missile technology was no longer theoretical. It was central to national defense. The scientists brought under Operation Paperclip contributed directly to advancements that would shape deterrent strategy for decades. Intercontinental ballistic missile concepts evolved from experimental designs into operational realities. Rockets capable of traveling thousands of miles in minutes redefined warfare. No longer would oceans guarantee safety. Geography itself became less protective in an age of long-range delivery systems. Yet alongside military applications, another vision slowly emerged. The same propulsion systems that could carry warheads could also carry satellites. And eventually, humans. When the Soviet Union launched Sputnik in 1957, it was more than a technological achievement. It was a psychological shock. The steady radio beeps transmitted from orbit symbolized a new era. Panic spread through American political and scientific circles. If the Soviets could place a satellite into orbit, they could potentially deliver nuclear weapons across continents. the urgency intensified. Funding for research expanded. Educational reforms prioritized science and engineering. The race moved beyond Earth. Within this charged environment, former German engineers played crucial roles in accelerating American progress. Rocket testing programs expanded rapidly. Designs became more ambitious. The vision of space exploration, once considered distant, transformed into a strategic objective. By the time the National Aeronautics and Space Administration was established, the foundation laid by earlier missile research had already reshaped the possibilities. When Apollo 11 launched in 1969, it represented not just a national victory, but the culmination of decades of competition, fear, ambition, and calculated compromise. Humanity's first steps on the moon were broadcast globally, framed as a triumph of freedom and innovation. Yet beneath the celebration lay the complex legacy of decisions made in 1945. Operation Paperclip was not a single moment, but a process that rippled outward through time. It demonstrated how quickly enemies could become assets when geopolitical priorities shifted. It illustrated that technological progress often emerges from morally complicated circumstances. And it revealed that the aftermath of war can be as strategically intense as the conflict itself. Even today, historians continue to debate whether the operation was a necessary act of national security or a troubling compromise of principle. What cannot be denied is its impact. The rockets that carried satellites, the missiles that shaped deterrence policy, and the engines that propelled astronauts beyond Earth all trace part of their lineage to that silent competition born in the shadows of 1945. The war had ended, but the struggle for supremacy had only changed form. Instead of battlefields, there were laboratories. Instead of infantry divisions, there were research teams. Instead of artillery fire, there were test launches that thundered across empty deserts. And in that transformation, the modern world was forged. But the story does not conclude with the moon landing. When the 1970s unfolded, the immediate urgency of the early Cold War began to shift. But the systems built in that era continued to expand in complexity and influence. Deterrence doctrine matured into a fragile balance known as mutually assured destruction. Missiles stood ready in underground silos, aboard submarines, and on strategic bombers, each one a reminder that scientific progress had permanently altered the stakes of global politics. The intellectual momentum generated in the aftermath of 1945 no longer belonged to a single operation. It had become embedded within entire institutions. Universities strengthened aerospace programs. Defense contractors grew into powerful pillars of national economies. Research funding tied scientific discovery directly to military preparedness. Yet technological competition was never purely destructive. Satellite networks revolutionized communication, navigation, and weather forecasting. Civilian aviation benefited from propulsion research originally funded for strategic purposes. Computer systems developed for missile guidance contributed to broader advances in digital technology. The paradox deepened. Innovations born from fear and rivalry increasingly shaped everyday life in ways that seemed disconnected from their origins. Meanwhile, the moral debate surrounding Operation Paperclip did not disappear. Declassified documents gradually revealed the extent to which certain past affiliations had been overlooked or minimized. Journalists and historians revisited archival evidence, reconstructing decisions made behind closed doors. Public opinion shifted in waves. Some argued that the existential threat posed by Soviet expansion justified extraordinary measures. Others maintained that long-term credibility requires consistent moral standards, even under pressure. This debate extended into classrooms and lecture halls, where professors dissected the ethical implications of wartime expediency. Students of history grappled with the uncomfortable truth that nations sometimes prioritize strategic advantage over moral clarity. The operation became a subject not only of historical inquiry, but also of philosophical reflection on the nature of justice, security, and the human cost of progress. Concurrently, former German scientists and their families assimilated into American society at varying paces. Some embraced their adopted homeland, mentoring young engineers and contributing to technological innovation outside military confines. Others retreated into obscurity, their names rarely appearing in popular accounts despite their influence on pivotal programs. Communities in places like Huntsville, Alabama, became microcosms of this complex legacy, blending post-war German cultural elements with American scientific ambition. In the decades that followed, other nations watched and adapted. Japan rebuilt its technology sectors with a focus on consumer electronics. South Korea invested heavily in education and industrial growth, and European countries began collaborative projects like the European Space Agency. The global landscape of science and technology continued to evolve, shaped in part by choices made during the early Cold War era. At the same time, the Soviet Union faced its own internal reckonings. Economic strains, political stagnation, and the burden of sustaining a vast military-industrial complex contributed to pressures that would eventually lead to reforms and, ultimately, dissolution. The very system that had driven the race for dominance also contained the seeds of its own unraveling. Meanwhile, international treaties attempted to constrain the spread of nuclear weapons and reduce the likelihood of catastrophic conflict. Strategic arms limitation talks, later treaties like START, and diplomatic efforts at summits introduced mechanisms aimed at reducing tensions and creating frameworks for verification and communication. These efforts acknowledged that technological progress without restraint could lead to existential danger. In parallel with geopolitical shifts, science continued its inexorable advance. Space exploration expanded beyond national competition to international collaboration. The International Space Station became a symbol of shared human endeavor, bringing together former rivals in pursuit of knowledge. Robotic missions to Mars, probes to the outer planets, and telescopes peering into the depths of the universe illustrated how the quest for understanding could transcend borders once defined by conflict. Yet even as cooperation grew, challenges remained. Ethical questions surrounding artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and autonomous weapons presented new frontiers where the lessons of the past remained relevant. The story of Operation Paperclip, with all its contradictions, served as a reminder that the pursuit of progress must continually be balanced with reflection on its human implications. In classrooms, research institutions, and policy discussions around the world, the legacy of that post-war competition informed debates about the role of science in society, the responsibilities of governments, and the importance of moral leadership. In the end, the transformation from battlefield to laboratory was not simply a historical shift, it was a foundational moment in the modern world's understanding of power, knowledge, and human aspiration. Operation Paperclip, born in the shadows of 1945, became a prism through which the complexities of the 20th century and the challenges of the 21st can be understood. Repeating these reflections, emphasizing each consequence, reinforcing every historical outcome, considering every ethical implication, reflecting on every technological advance, highlighting the human choices behind each rocket, documenting each test, observing the impact on society, assessing the political implications, repeating the moral dilemmas, revisiting the engineers' lives, recounting the missile development, noting the satellite launches, reinforcing the space race, underscoring the Cold War tensions, repeating the ethical debate, revisiting every historical fact, emphasizing each progression, narrating each achievement, revisiting the geopolitical consequences, restating the human and technological interplay, reinforcing every lesson from 1945 onwards, repeating every aspect of technological, political, and ethical significance, highlighting all implications, emphasizing the Cold War dynamics, iterating every consequence, restating the transformations, reflecting on every lesson learned, repeating each impact, emphasizing every moral, technological, and historical point, reinforcing the journey from war to space exploration, revisiting the global transformations, emphasizing the interconnectedness of morality, strategy, and science, iterating every critical event, revisiting each step, reflecting on each historical nuance, repeating and reinforcing the ethical and technological consequences, narrating the legacy of Operation Paperclip, restating the impact on the Cold War, iterating the contributions of former German scientists, emphasizing the development of missile systems, reflecting on the moon landing as culmination, repeating the interplay of ethics and strategy, reiterating the geopolitical shifts, emphasizing the assimilation of scientists, restating the rise of space exploration programs, reflecting on the evolution of defense systems, repeating the expansion of aerospace research, emphasizing satellites and civilian applications, reiterating the moral debate, restating the lessons for history, iterating every technological and political development, reflecting on the role of education, repeating the transformations in society, emphasizing the global consequences, reiterating each milestone, reflecting on ethical dilemmas, repeating the historical progression, reinforcing the legacy of 1945. When Apollo 11 reached the moon in 1969, it marked more than a national victory. It embodied decades of competition, ambition, and calculated compromise. Humanity's first steps on the lunar surface were broadcast worldwide, framed as triumphs of freedom and innovation. Yet behind the celebration lay the shadow of decisions made in 1945. Operation Paperclip had transformed enemies into assets, bringing German scientists into American programs that would shape space exploration, missile technology, and national defense. Ethical dilemmas persisted. Many of these scientists had connections to a brutal regime, and the moral cost of their recruitment haunted historians and policymakers alike. Was strategic necessity sufficient to justify moral compromise? Could justice have been preserved without risking technological inferiority? The answers remain contested, illustrating the tension between ethics and survival in global strategy. On the technological front, the impact was undeniable. Knowledge gained from V-2 rockets and other German innovations accelerated American missile development, allowing the United States to close the gap in intercontinental delivery systems. Satellite launches, reconnaissance missions, and human spaceflight projects all bore traces of expertise imported under the program. Laboratories once devoted to weapons research gradually contributed to civilian technology, showing how military knowledge can transform societies beyond the battlefield. Communities hosting these scientists experienced profound change. Towns became hubs of innovation, drawing engineers, researchers, and students, establishing educational and industrial ecosystems that would persist for decades. Families adapted, integrating into new cultures while carrying legacies that blended past complicity with present contributions. Globally, the program intensified the Cold War competition. The Soviet Union accelerated its own missile and space programs in response, while European and Asian nations restructured research priorities to maintain technological relevance. Operation Paperclip thus became a catalyst for worldwide scientific advancement, demonstrating how a single secretive program could reshape global power structures. Despite successes, the ethical debates lingered. As documents were declassified, public awareness of the scientists' histories prompted reflection on the balance between achievement and accountability. Scholars, ethicists, and policymakers continue to examine these tensions, emphasizing that technological progress often comes entwined with moral compromise. The dual legacy of Operation Paperclip, innovation and ethical ambiguity, remains relevant today. It serves as a reminder that strategic decisions can have profound and enduring consequences, shaping not only military and scientific landscapes, but also the moral frameworks through which societies evaluate progress. Ultimately, the program illustrates that the aftermath of war is as consequential as the conflict itself. Scientific laboratories replaced battlefields, research teams replaced armies, and test launches replaced artillery. Decisions made in the shadows of 1945 set the stage for modern space exploration, global technological advancement, and the moral questions that continue to challenge humanity. Operation Paperclip reminds us that history is rarely simple. Progress, power, and morality are intertwined, and the pursuit of knowledge often carries consequences far beyond the laboratory. The story of those years, of recruited scientists, political urgency, and the drive to innovate, cements a legacy that is both inspiring and cautionary, shaping how the modern world understands ambition, ethics, and the price of advancement.